Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Liberty Hangout podcast. My name is Justin. I'm the founder of libertyhangout.org, and I'm also joined by my co-hosts James and Mac. We have a very special guest joining us tonight. He is the Harold E. Wirth Eminent Scholar Endowed Chair in Economics at Loyola University, New Orleans. He is also a senior fellow at the Mises Institute, as well as a columnist for LouRockwell.com. He's known for writing Defending the Undefendable, as well as his most recent books, Towards a Libertarian Society and Water Capitalism. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy to introduce to you Dr. Walter Block. How are you doing, Walter?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on your show.
So everyone around libertarian circles always jokes that Bernie Sanders knows nothing of economics, so I thought it would be wise to pounce on this opportunity and actually create a GoFundMe campaign to raise money to pay for Bernie to take an economics course with the world's leading free market economist, none other than Walter Block. And when Walter actually got wind of our initiative, he reached out to James asking if he could come on our podcast. So Walter, what are your thoughts about our GoFundMe, and what would you plan on teaching Bernie if he does accept our offer?
Well, I'm delighted to spread economic knowledge and certainly to spread it to my old buddy Bernie. Bernie and I went to high school for 4 years, and we overlapped at Brooklyn College for 1 year, and then he went off to the University of Chicago. I finished at Brooklyn College. He's pretty famous now. He's running for president, and he's giving Hillary a good fight. And he really needs to learn some economics, so I'm delighted that you would support this. Not so much my course, but I would assign him books like Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt. And I think that under my tutelage, if he read that book, he would have very different views on economics.
So you said that you and Bernie went to high school together. You want to tell us a little more about that?
Well, he was one of the best track runners in the city, actually. I was a mediocre runner, anywhere from half mile to about 2.5 miles cross country. Bernie was one of the top runners in the city, and I would, in a race, see his rear end receding in the distance because he was way better than me. We were not only on the track team together, but we lived in a similar quadrant away from Madison High School, so sometimes we'd walk to school together or from school toward our homes. I wasn't really a good friend of his, but certainly an acquaintance, and then I'd see him at Brooklyn College once in a while. So I would say he's more of an acquaintance than a good friend, but, he is an acquaintance, and a local boy makes good, and I'm, proud to know my man Bernie. He's a nice guy. He was very amiable. He was, even in those days, he was sort of the center of attraction. He ran for president of Madison High School but didn't make it, but the guy who did make it adopted Bernie's policies, so it might be that we're replaying that with Hillary now. Hillary might beat him, but she's sort of adopting his policies. He's pushing her way toward the socialist end or the fascist end, actually. He was a very nice guy. He had charisma. He was very popular. He almost won the presidency of the school. So he was a bit of a politician even then. And as it happens, my own views were very similar to his views when we were both in high school. It's just that I came under the tutelage of Ayn Rand, and I read Economics in One Lesson by Henry Hazlitt and Atlas Shrugged, and I got converted to the one true faith, namely free enterprise, and Bernie never did, unfortunately.
Now, Walter, keep it on the subject of Bernie Sanders. One of the largest tenets of his presidential campaign right now has been the promise of free college, free preschool, and free health care. What are your thoughts on these promises, and what are your thoughts on the economic implications of completely socializing these issues?
Well, I favor free everything. Free tuna fish, free pretzels, free cars, free houses, free everything. But that's not really what he's proposing. He's not proposing free as in the economic sense costless. That would be wonderful. I'm with my man Bernie on that. Rather, what he is proposing is taking money from some people and giving it to other people in order to make it free to them. So it's not really free college. Free college and preschool and healthcare and all that will still cost in the sense of the alternative costs. So what he's really doing is putting his big fat thumb on the balance wheel and pushing us in a direction that we really don't want to go. Look, right now, the allocation of resources between peas and carrots, let's say, is okay. At least there's no crisis. The New York Times hasn't written about the imbalance of peas and carrots. And let's suppose that people want peas and carrots in roughly 50%, 50%. Okay, so now Bernie or somebody says, well, let's have free carrots. Well, if we have free carrots, that means we're going to take money from all other goods, including peas, and encourage more carrots. And now we're going to have, say, 75% of the money allotted to those two for carrots and only 25% for peas, namely a 3-to-1 ratio instead of a 1-to-1 ratio. And that's not cool. That's not a good resource allocation. That's just making more of something and less of something else. Hazlitt tells us to be aware not only of the seen but also the unseen, to be aware not only of free college, but if we had free college, we'd have fewer motorcycles, fewer violins, fewer, I don't know, shoelaces, or whatever goods you can think of. And I think that he has to make a case that there's somehow a misallocation right now, that there's too little college and too many lima beans or watermelons or yellow ties of the sort that James is wearing. And he's nowhere even close to thinking about it in those terms. He never mentions it as a problem. It's just sort of, like Santa Claus will get us free stuff. And this is economic illiteracy.
Now, how does that tie into, when you spoke about Henry Hazlitt a couple times? How does that tie into your production and your advocacy for economics in one lesson? How big of an impact did that have during your high school years or during your college years?
Well, it was in my senior year in college that I met Ayn Rand, and it has had a profound effect on me. Henry Hazlitt had one thesis, one principle. Then they look at any economic policy, not only in the short run and the long run, not only for these people, but for everybody. Then he had 35 chapters illustrating this, or 30 chapters. Well, my books, Defending the Undefendable 1 and 2, are very similar. It's sort of my homage to him. I, too, have one thesis in Defending the Undefendable, namely, we want to defend people who do things that either that do not violate the libertarian non-aggression principle and yet are hated and reviled or prohibited by law. And then I have 30 or 35 chapters illustrating that these people should be defended. So I'm a real big fan of Henry Hazlitt. And whenever I teach an introductory micro course, I always get my students to read that, because one, it converted me, and two, I think it's the best introduction to libertarianism, to economics ever written. So if Bernie, thanks to you guys, ever took my course, I would use that as a standard reading.
Now, you've been known as one of the world's leading voices for Austrian economics. How would you define Austrian economics to our listeners, and would you be able to compare it with other schools of economics, most notably Keynesian and the Chicago schools of thought?
Sure. Well, I don't know that I'm the most eminent Austrian, but I'm certainly an Austrian economist, a follower of Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises. First, let me just say, for people who are not acquainted with this, Austrian economics has nothing to do with the economics of the country Austria, any more than Chicago economics has anything to do with the economics of the city Chicago. Chicago economics is named that because the people who started it, Milton Friedman and George Stigler, Gary Becker, just were at the University of Chicago. Well, similarly, Austrian economics is known because the people who started it were in the country Austria. Menger, Baum-Bawerk, Mises, Hayek were Austrian people who started this, and that's why it's called Austrian economics. Now, the difference between Austrian economics on the one hand and Chicago and Keynesian economics on the other hand is, or you might say between Austrian economics and mainstream economics, is that Austrian economics is a, how shall I say it, a logical enterprise, and not an empirical enterprise, a logical enterprise. It starts with basic premises and then it deduces from there. For example, human action, people act. And if you try to deny that, you're acting. So you can't deny it. It's like a basic premise. We Austrians believe in a thing called the synthetic a priori, which means that there are economic laws, not just hypotheses, but economic laws, such that that they have something to do with the real world and they are logically irrefutable. Whereas the mainstream people say that if it's logically irrefutable, if it's necessarily true, then it's just a tautology and it's got nothing to do with the real world. And on the other hand, if it has something to do with the real world, it's only tentative or a hypothesis. So, for example, let's suppose I trade you this pen over here for James's yellow tie. I'm very enamored of that yellow tie. And if we make this trade, it must necessarily be true that I like James's tie more than the pen, and that James, for some stupid reason, values my pen more than the tie. Now, we don't know why it is. Maybe he thinks that I'll give him an A in a course, but I'm not teaching him a course. Who knows what's in his mind? All we can deduce is that if he makes that voluntary trade, he values something about this pen more than his tie, and I value something about the tie more than the pen. Now, I say that that is necessarily true, apodictically true, cannot be denied, and yet it has something to do with the real world. It explains trade. That people benefit in the ex ante sense of anticipations from trade. Whereas the Chicago school and the Keynesian school and the entire neoclassical synthesis would say, no, 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 it's either a tautology, in which case it's necessarily true, but it has nothing to do with reality, or it's not necessarily true, it's only an empirical statement, we have to test it, and then it has something to do with the real world. But how do you test this sort of a thing? If you know the English language, you know that this is undeniable. Okay, so that's one arena. Another arena of the difference between Austrian economics on the one hand and Keynesian or Chicago monetarist economics on the other hand is in macroeconomics. And here I claim, Milton Friedman once said, I think he said we're all Keynesians now. Yes, that was a quote from Friedman. Now, in a sense, the Chicago school is a little bit more free enterprise than the Yale or Harvard or Princeton. Like on the minimum wage, they were pretty good on that, even though they saw it as an empirical issue, not as an apodictic issue. But on macroeconomics, they're just all equally bad. For example, the way these guys see the macroeconomy is that it's sort of like a car. And the car is on the road, but it's always going to veer off either into unemployment or inflation. And it's the role of the government, the Fed or the central bank or the fisc, namely, what do you call it, expenditure and tax policy, to keep the car on the road in the middle of the road and not go off into the ditch on either side. The big difference is that the Chicago types, for some reason, rely on monetary policy, and the Keynesians rely on fiscal policy. But other than that, there's not a dime's worth of difference. They both believe in aggregate demand, and the Keynesian, what do you call it, cross model, or aggregate demand, aggregate supply, or the other models of that sort, ISLM. And whereas the Austrians don't see it that way. The Austrians don't see that the market is imperfect in this way, that the market is always going to veer off into unemployment or inflation. The Austrians see Adam Smith's invisible hand as fine, as neither creating inflation nor unemployment. And the reason we have these things is because of government interference. So that would be another difference between the Austrians and the mainstream, whether they're left-wing Keynesian fiscalists or right-wing monetarist Chicagoites.
So now, following up, that was a tremendous introduction. Now, following up, can you summarize the views of consequential libertarian thought as opposed to philosophical, and how they either compare or contrast with your own? And also, what are your thoughts on the work of David Friedman, who is one of the top consequentialist theorists in the world?
Okay, well, we're now getting off economics and onto libertarianism. Right. It's fine.
Right.
We don't have to stick to any one thing. Anything of interest is good. Well, not only David Friedman, but even Mises was a utilitarian or a consequentialist or a pragmatist. Murray Rothbard, I think, was the main deontologist, or seeing that libertarianism is based on rights rather than consequences, and utilitarianism. But, you know, I'm sort of a moderate. That's why they call me Walter Moderate Block. I believe in both. I believe that the free enterprise system is not only proper, righteous, rights-based, but also leads to the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. But I'm more certainly inclined, as was Rothbard, into the rights-based view, namely that the essence of libertarianism is the non-aggression principle. The essence of libertarianism is keep your mitts to yourself unless you have the permission of other people. Don't be grabbing other people or their property without their permission. So you can engage in boxing and you can be hit or hit, but because your opponent permitted you to do that, or even voluntary sadomasochism. You know the joke about sadomasochism, the masochist asks the sadist, beat me, and the sadist says, no. So that's the masochist joke. The idea that that would be voluntary or legitimate because it's between consenting adults. Children are a different issue. Okay, so I believe that the free enterprise system is not only rightful because it consists of nothing but voluntary trades like the pen for the tie, or buying and selling a house, or renting, or lending money and borrowing money. That's all the market consists of, is voluntary trades. So necessarily it's beneficial to all market participants, because if they didn't think it beneficial, they wouldn't do it. Okay, so I think that the market is not only just and righteous, but also it is beneficial, utilitarian. The problem with utilitarianism, though, is the utility monster. I enjoy killing and eating people to such a great degree, much more than you guys disenjoy being killed and eaten. I get 10 million utils out of it. You only lose 1,000 utils. Therefore, you should come on out of my place, jump into my oven, and let me cook you and eat you. This is a problem. So I'm not really a big fan of utilitarianism, but I'm sort of sideways. I think that if you eschew cases like that, you can come up to utilitarian conclusions from libertarian premises. Now, David Friedman is a magnificent contributor to anarcho-capitalism. He's done good work on that. He shows that you don't really need the government. He's an anarcho-capitalist, and I salute him for that. But he isn't really a Rothbardian. He's more of a Milton Friedman type with regard to economics and with regard to libertarianism. He once wrote this book, The Machinery of Freedom, and I think it's his chapter 43, where he said something to the effect that the non-aggression principle doesn't work because, I guess his example was, if you shine a flashlight into someone's house, that's okay, but then if you increase the wattage of the flashlight, now you burn the guy's house, that's not okay, and somehow the non-aggression principle doesn't work. I never understood that. I wrote a critique of this, and I sent it to David, and I said, hey, David, let's get it on. Let's, either have a formal debate, verbal debate, on the same stage, or I published this article, which is a critique of your stuff. Why don't you publish, a defense of your book, that chapter, and a critique of my article, and then I'll write back, and we'll get to the truth of this. And he declined to do that. Let me give you one of my Milton Friedman stories, which is indicative of Milton and David. And what was happening was I was favoring reparations in South America, because a lot of these South American and Central American countries, 100 families or 50 families or 150 families own 92 or 94% of all the land. And I was saying, well, the reason that they owned the land was not based on John Lockean homesteading. It was based on the conquistadores killing the people who lived there and taking over their land, and therefore we should have reparations. Namely, the grandchildren of the conquistadores should give some of that land to the grandchildren of the people from whom it was stolen, because I believe in private property rights, and when there's theft, even if it's a couple of years or a couple of decades or a couple of centuries, we should try to make it right. So what Milton Friedman said was, land is only 8 or 10% of the GDP, and these countries would be way better off if, instead of worrying about land redistribution or land reparations, we freed up the economy today. No regulations, free trade, this, that, and the other. I said, Milton, I agree with you. That's a good point. However, can't we also have reparations? Wouldn't it be just to have reparations? And the word justice sort of didn't he couldn't get it. He didn't understand what I was talking about, even though I'm being as clear now as I was then that it's unfair. And this sort of word wasn't in his lexicon, and all he did is he repeated, well, GDP is, land isn't that important, and they'd be better off. And I said, yes, 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 I agree. But in addition to that, wouldn't it be fair and just and righteous? And he started saying, well, the search for justice will end up everyone killing everybody, and it was just sort of very unsatisfying. So Milton and David, I revere them in some ways. They've made marvelous contributions, but they're not Rothbardians. They're not really libertarians, or at least they come to libertarian conclusions sometimes, but their premises are so different that you sort of can't trust them. It's sort of like Donald Trump nowadays says good things, but he's got no principles on the basis from which he deduces it. It's just sort of random. Whereas Rand Paul at least has a philosophy, and he doesn't fully follow it like his father did, Ron Paul, but at least he's got some sort of basic premise from which he deduces things, whereas Donald Trump doesn't. And I would say the same thing is true in this case, that the Friedmans, father and son, and Rose also, Milton's wife and David's mother, are the same way. That they have no libertarian principles. They just sort of happily come to many libertarian conclusions, and some not libertarian. For example, his opposition to, and this is Milton, not David, opposition to gold, and a favor of the voucher system, and all sorts of other welfare, negative income tax, and all sorts of weird things that just sort of come out from no libertarian principles.
I'm glad that you mentioned Donald Trump, because I actually wanted to talk a bit about the 2016 election with you. And obviously one of the most pertinent topics for Republicans is the issue of immigration. So what stance do you think libertarians should be taking on immigration, and how can you best explain the dilemma of immigration from both an economic principle and a moral perspective?
Well, I'm not that interested in the economics of it, although I'm an economist, so I can't not be interested in it, but I'm much more interested in the ethical or the libertarian, or what should the law be. And here we have a bit of an anomaly, because, there are two issues that are very, very contentious and confrontational among libertarians and also in the general public. One of them is abortion, where you have Ron Paul, eminent libertarian who is pro-life, and Murray Rothbard, eminent libertarian who is pro-choice. And, that's certainly a contentious issue among libertarians. Just those two are both exquisite libertarians and yet disagree. And also in the general public, and on immigration as well. And here you have people such as myself, who am totally open borders. On the other hand, you have Murray Rothbard and Hans Hoppe, who I, again, revere and exult in. I mean, I think they're two of the, Murray was Mr. Libertarian, and Hans is, one of Murray's chief lieutenants and truest Rothbardian out there. And yet I think they are mistaken on this. So let me give you their view, and then I'll give you my view as to why I think they're wrong on this. Okay, so what Hans says, and, Murray earlier on was pro-open borders, and then later on he became anti-open borders, and now he's against open immigration. Okay, so what do Murray and especially Hans say? Hans says, look, there are three ways that we can deal with each other internationally. One is goods. Let's say, let me see, who's from New Jersey? Justin is from New Jersey, yes, and I'm from New Orleans or Louisiana. Let's say we're different countries, and one way we can engage with each other is trade. So I'll sell you 100 cows, and you pay me, 100 a cow or something like that. So that's trade. And what's earmarked there is that there was consenting adult behavior. Two people agreed to the deal. I'll sell you a cow for 100 each, or whatever the price is, and you agree and I agree, and that's cool. The second way that we can interact across national borders, let's say New Jersey and Canada now, let's say that Mac invests in Canada, and he buys some land in Canada, and the only way he can buy land in Canada is to get some Canadian to agree to sell him some land. So again, you have two people agreeing. And now Hans says, but look, in immigration, it's very different. In immigration, Mac just goes to Canada without any buy or leave. He doesn't get anyone in Canada to agree to this. He just sort of shows up on the Canadian doorstep, and Hans says, well, that's a trespass. And you know what libertarians think about trespass. It's a violation of private property rights. So therefore, we shouldn't have open borders. Now, my refutation or my critique of this is, okay, look, let's suppose some guy from China or India or Africa or Mars, for that matter, wants to come into land in the middle of Alaska or in the middle of the Rockies, say in Wyoming. Namely, what I do is I look at this from the libertarian eyeglasses of the non-aggression principle, and I say, well, has he per se violated any rights? And I say, well, look, this land might be claimed by the Bureau of Land Management or by the U.S. government, but they never did diddly squat to justify their ownership of it, because for libertarians, and this is an intra-libertarian debate, for libertarians, the only way you can get to own land is by homesteading. And the BLM and Obama never touched foot in the middle of Alaska or in the middle of Wyoming or Nevada. So therefore, if this guy comes from Mars or China or India or Africa or anywhere and starts homesteading land in the middle of the United States, he did not violate the non-aggression principle, and therefore anyone who stops him is violating the non-aggression principle, and therefore open borders are justified. Now, the pragmatic argument is, well, look, suppose you get a billion Chinese or a billion Indians or a billion black people or a billion from Africa or a billion Martians come here. They'll change our culture. They'll change everything. There'll be fighting because there's more fighting if you have heterogeneous people, and I agree with that. So my answer is, okay, privatize every single square inch of the country, and then it will be trespassed. But until and unless we privatize everything, and my previous book was Privatize Roads and Highways, and my book forthcoming is Privatize Rivers, Lakes, and Oceans. So, okay, look, here's a way to compromise this. Let's privatize everything, and then you don't have to worry about being overrun by scores of, millions of people that we don't like or some people don't like. And until then, the libertarian, you see, I'm just trying to get at what the libertarian theory is, because I'm a libertarian, and I think it's important that we get clarification as to what the libertarian view is. And the libertarian view is privatize everything, and then it will be trespass. And if you don't privatize everything, you deserve to be overrun by people from, I don't know where it is now, Iraq or Iran or wherever they're coming from, or Mexico. Trump wants to build a wall. Well, so that would be my answer. Open borders. We should have complete open borders. And I think that Murray and Hans, with all due respect to them, and I greatly respect them, I think they're wrong on this issue.
Now, what would you make of the counter-argument that states that because when people are taxed, they are in some sense paying for these services, and so to some degree you can say that government borders can, in a sense, be like private? What would you make of some libertarians that present that argument there?
Well, that's the Hans view. You see, so far what I did is I talked just about virgin land that has never been homesteaded. But suppose that, in New York City you have Central Park, in New Orleans we have Audubon Park. Suppose some guy from Mars or China starts homesteading Audubon Park, an acre in Audubon Park, or an acre in Central Park, or a road, or whatever it is, a government facility, or a government library, or a museum, or whatever. And here I say, well, this is not legitimate. And now Hans would say, but, we paid for this. We, through taxes, paid for this. And I still say that this is insufficient, because let's forget about land like that. Let's talk about virgin land. They have no argument whatsoever with regard to virgin land. I don't care you pay taxes. The key for the libertarian is, do you homestead it or not? And this is unhomesteaded stuff. No human being has ever been in certain parts of the Rocky Mountains or Alaska or whatever. Now, with regard to the government land, yes, we've paid for it, but let me give you this example. Okay, so here I am. We're in 1942, and I'm an anti-Nazi, and I come and I go to Germany, and I start getting ready to. I go to a Nazi garage where there are all sorts of I don't know, tanks and half tracks and jeeps and stuff like that, and I'm about to spread gasoline all over so that I can burn them all. And some guy comes along and says, "Hey, whoa, whoa, don't do that. Don't be burning the Nazi tanks, because I am a taxpayer in Germany and I paid for it and I own a bit of it and I represent the Germans, and therefore we should you, Walter, shouldn't be doing this." Well, I say, look, you're objectively taking the side of the Nazis. You don't want to be doing that and call yourself a libertarian. So I think that I'm on shakier ground when I talk about non-homesteaded public property. But even there, I think I have a good argument against Hans, saying that, look, this public property, we should get rid of it. And you, in defending it against the outside homesteader, the outside immigrant, are taking the statist side. And you're an anarcho-capitalist. You shouldn't be taking the side of statism. So I think that we have a little problem on their side of this argument.
Now, just backtracking a bit, I know that you did bring up abortion as being one of the two most controversial topics in libertarianism. To my knowledge, you are an evictionist. Would you be able to explain that a little bit to our listeners?
Well, not a little bit. It takes a while because it's a very complicated thing. Yes, but let me take a hack at that because it's an important issue. The problem with the word abortion is that it's really two different things. It's eviction and killing. And we have to distinguish them, and that's why I think that the debate over this issue is so much heat and very little light. But first, I have to tell you a joke. In the Jewish tradition, when is the fetus viable? When it graduates from medical school? Okay, so off the jokes now, and back to the, a little levity is good. Thanks for appreciating that. I believe that the fertilized egg is a human being. A very young human being, but a human being. Why? Because the sperm alone and the egg alone will not, no matter what, eventuate into a human being. Whereas if you put the fertilized egg in a good environment, it will become a human being. And if you put us in a bad environment, we'll die. And we're only living because we're in a proper Earth-like environment. So the human being starts with the fertilized egg. Okay, so now you have a mother, and she doesn't want this person inside of her. Now look, if I come to your living room and you don't want me there, I'm a trespasser. Well, even assuming that this baby, the fetus, child, whatever, 3 months old, it already has fingers and eyes and a nose, it's unwanted, so it's a trespasser. So if you have a trespasser, what do you have a right to do with a trespasser? And the answer is kill him? No, you can't just kill a trespasser unless he initiates violence against you, and certainly the fetus is innocent. But you have a right to evict. Now, this is a true compromise. This is why they call me Walter Moderate Block, because in the last trimester, 7th, 8th, and 9th month, if you evict, you need not kill, and the baby will be viable outside the womb. So in the 3rd trimester, I am, in effect, a pro-lifer. By the way, I'm really pro-life. I love human beings, and I think we should support them. So my heart of hearts, I'm pro-life, not pro-choice in this issue, although I'm pro-choice in every other context, of course. Whereas I'm pro-choice in the first 2 trimesters, because if you evict, you'll kill. However, this is today's medical technology. Surely in 10 years or 20 years, the babies in the 6th month will be able to be viable outside the womb, and in 50 years, maybe the babies in the 5th month. You know that in 1,000 years from now, if we don't blow ourselves up, babies at the inception will be able to be put in a super-duper test tube or some sort of host mother mechanical thing, and then it'll be clear that eviction is legitimate, but killing is not. So I am an evictionist. I'm neither an pro-abortion nor anti-abortion, because abortion is 2 things, killing and evicting, and I insist that we have to distinguish between these 2. And now the argument against me is, well, look, the mother invited the fetus in. and therefore she has to keep him for 9 months. Look, if you guys invite me to your living room, I don't have to stay for 9 months. You can say, look, Block, we had the meal, leave. and also, there was no invitation, because let me explain the birds and the bees here, or as in New Jersey they say boids, or Brooklyn boids. The boids and the bees, at the time of intercourse, it takes a little while for the sperm to get to the egg, a half hour, an hour, I'm not sure, whatever. So at the time of voluntary intercourse, there was no invitation. And Judith Jarvis Thompson says, look, if I open the window, that doesn't mean it's an invitation for a burglar to come in, just because it's easier for them to come in. And also, what about the product of rape? In the case of rape, you can't tell me there was any invitation. That's crazy. So does the mother have a right to evict, or evict whether the baby will live or die? Yes. And since all babies have the same rights, no other baby has any more rights than a baby who is the product of rape, because the baby who's the product of rape is totally innocent. So therefore, I say that this counter-argument to the invitation business is all wrong, and I think that the evictionism is the only proper view for the libertarian on this issue, and it's a real compromise. A false compromise would be, I say 2 + 2 is 4, you say 2 + 2 is 6, so we compromise and say 2 + 2 is 5. That's not a principled compromise. That's just sort of adding it up and dividing by 2. But I'm giving a principled compromise based on libertarian property rights. Who owns the womb? The mother. And therefore, she should say what stays in there, but not whether it lives or dies. Now, if we adopt evictionism, right away 1/3 of all babies will be safeguarded, because you can't have this thing called partial birth abortion, where you take an 8-month-old fetus and you go in and suck out its brains and then you pull it out dead. I mean, that's just despicable. And yet the feminists think that they have a right to do that too. So I think this is a real important contribution to libertarian theory. And I've been writing about this for the last 30 years, and I'm having trouble getting traction on it. So I'm glad you asked me about it, so that more people will understand about this. I must have written, I don't know, 15 articles on this, and maybe 10 people have disagreed with me, and I've engaged in debates with them. One of these days I'm going to come out with a book on evictionism. I think it's very important for libertarians to solve this problem, even though you have Murray Rothbard and Ron Paul at opposite ends of the spectrum on this. They're both wrong. Sorry.
Now, I thought that was an awesome description. I think it's our job now as libertarians to be responsible and to be intellectually consistent when we say we're pro-life. And that kind of moves us to our next topic, which for Democrats, it seems that many are concerned with rampant police brutality, as we've seen with many of the Black Lives Matter protests throughout the country. What do you think of the liberal stance that we need to give the state more money and more power in order to alleviate police brutality? And what does Dr. Walter Block, what's his prescription for how police brutality can be quelled?
Well, first of all, privatize, my motto is, if it moves, privatize it. If it doesn't move, privatize it. And since everything either moves or doesn't move, you privatize everything. And then you'll have a better product. I mean, whenever they, well, first of all, privatization is more ethical, because the government taxes you against your will for, services that it then gives you. And secondly, the government is never that efficient. And the reason is they don't have this automatic weeding out process. Look, the reason ties and pens and wristwatches and other things are pretty good is because we have competition. And if somebody makes a lousy watch, we don't buy it, or a lousy burger, or a lousy mouse in the case of Disney World. We just don't patronize them, and then the ones remaining in the industry are pretty good. So one answer to that is privatization. Look, you have private cops all over the place. You have private cops in Disney World. You have private cops in Walgreens, in Walmart, in all those places. And those private cops are taught that if you brutalize people, your company isn't going to attract customers, and the owner is going to try to make sure you don't brutalize people. On the other hand, this thing about Black Lives Matter and the idea that white cops are killing young black men, I don't know how many young black men have been killed by white cops in the last year. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know. Very, very, very few. But massive numbers of young black men are being killed by who?
Each other.
By each other. Why? Well, mainly because of the drug war. Look, when we had the prohibition of alcohol, young Italian men were shooting each other over turf. Now we have the drug war, young black men are shooting each other. So if you're really concerned about Black Lives Matter, and of course Black Lives Matter, all lives matter, not just black lives, all lives matter, what you do is you legalize all drugs, and then there'll be no young black men shooting each other, and not only shooting each other, but disproportionately in jail. I think the U.S. is not only the world's leader in incarceration on a statistical proportional basis, but even on an absolute basis. And we only have 350 million people, and China and India got 1 billion each, or 1.5 billion, or whatever it is, and we've got more prisoners than them. And Louisiana is the worst state in the union in terms of numbers of people incarcerated, which ruins the black community, the black family, by putting so many young black men in jail. So I think what we ought to do is legalize drugs and maybe get rid of the minimum wage law, which unemploys young black men disproportionately, and that would be the doc block remedy for some of these problems.
Just shifting from James's question a bit, obviously another area of concern. You want to go ahead, Mac?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Back in the 70s, Hayek talked about denationalizing money and having competing currencies. It seemed like he was talking about paper tickets, and Rothbard on the other end was talking about returning to a gold standard. With this digital revolution that we're going through right now, with the advent of Bitcoin 7 years ago, where do you see money going in the future, and how do you think Bitcoin will compare to silver and gold?
Well, I've written a lot about that, and I can't really do full justice to it, but if any of the people that are listening to this want to get more on this, email me. I'm at wblock, WBLOCK, at loino.edu, Lewis, Oliver, Yellow, New Orleans.edu, and I can, just say Bitcoin or money or something, or say evictionism, and I'll send you some stuff. So let me answer your question now, but just saying that if people need more, they can get it that way. Murray Rothbard doesn't favor the gold standard. Murray Rothbard and me, and I agree with Murray on about 99.99% of everything, we favor free market money. So why do we call it the gold standard? Well, because whenever people were free to choose, and Milton Friedman had a series, Free to Choose, but somehow people shouldn't be free to choose gold? Don't ask. Whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold and sometimes silver. So what we're saying is that this is what free market money should be, and that the Fed is an abomination, an economic abomination, and a legal abomination, and an ethical one, and horror in every way. If you look at the volatility of the business cycle in the 100 years before and after the Fed in 1913, before it was, just a little oscillations, and afterward the oscillations have been crazy. Why should we have central planning for money? Didn't the Soviet Union, didn't the example of North and South Korea, East and West Germany show us that central planning doesn't work? So why do we need central planning for money? The Cato Institute, which is supposedly free enterprise, they'll have a conference on money, and I'll have all these Fed people. These Fed people should be banned from anything doing with free market money, because they're the antithesis. It's sort of like having a free enterprise thing and inviting the Soviet Planning Bureau to come down and talk about it. Bitcoin, well, there's the normative and the positive. Normatively, I favor anything between consenting adults, and Bitcoin is between consenting adults, and therefore it would be okay. But I don't think it would beat out gold. For various technical reasons, but on the positive sense, I think that the government is going to just prohibit it, because they see it as a competition. They're bothering people who are doing Bitcoin now, but I think Bitcoin is better than what we have now. I mean, that's not saying much. That's damning praise. I mean, what we now have is U.S. currency, which is fraudulent. So I think what we should do is get rid of fractional reserve banking. Larry White and George Seldrin, to the contrary notwithstanding, these are people who supposedly free enterprises who favor fraudulent money. So I'm sort of a fan of Bitcoin, but I'm much more of a fan of free market money. And the reason I favor free market money is I favor the free market, and I note that whenever people were free to choose, they chose gold. So I'm sort of on line with gold more than I am with Bitcoin.
Now, while we're on the topic there, I want to get your thoughts on something real quick. Now, given the fact that the Fed has kept interest rates at 0% for many years now, and they may actually introduce QE4, do you anticipate the U.S. defaulting on its $18 trillion debt?
Well, the U.S. is already defaulting in the sense that they're having inflation, and therefore they're paying back with lousier dollars than they were given. Now, there is such a thing as repudiation. Murray Rothbard talked about repudiation, and I think the government should repudiate. Anyone who lent the government money was aiding and abetting government, and therefore, from a libertarian point of view, deserves what they get. I think that would be one way to go, to repudiate the national debt. We shouldn't have a national debt. Well, we shouldn't have any government. Although Murray was a real sellout, because he said that he would favor George Washington's budget, which was like $30,000 a year or something like that. He was serious about that, but he was just sort of kidding. Actually, he doesn't favor government at all, so we shouldn't have any government budget because we're free market anarchists. So I think that the way to go is freedom in this realm as in every other realm.
So one of our last topics we wanted to cover while we have you here, we wanted to hear your thoughts on another hot button issue in libertarian theorem, and it's intellectual property rights. This is one of the most divided issues amongst libertarians, and Rothbard himself defended copyrights in his book Man, Economy, and State. We wanted to know, where does Dr. Walter Block stand on intellectual property rights? I'm
a Stephan Kinselian. Stephan is one of the chief libertarian theoreticians, along with David Gordon and Hans Hoppe, who are still alive. Obviously, Murray Rothbard is the man. But I agree with Stephan, who criticized Murray. Now, Murray was good on patents. He was against patents, but he favored copyrights. And Stephan makes a very, very powerful argument that the only property rights that we really need are things that are scarce. For example, we need property rights in pens, we need property rights in watches, we need property rights in James's tie, and then things like that. Why? Because if right now I have this pen, but if Mac takes this pen, then he has it and I don't. Namely, it's a scarce good. But suppose girl A puts her hair up in a ponytail, and she's the first one to do it, and it keeps the hair out of her face, and it looks great and all that. And now girl B puts her hair up in the ponytail, and girl B says, wow, that's a great idea. I'll put my hair up in a ponytail. And now girl A goes over to girl B and disarranges her hair and pulls out the rubber band? No, that's assault and battery. It's true that girl B got the idea from girl A, but once the idea was out there, girl A still has a ponytail, so they can both have a ponytail. Einstein invents E equals mc squared. I'm not sure what it means, but let's suppose I do, and I use it. Well, he still has it. We can all have it. It's not a scarce good, so you can't have property rights on it. Now, Murray makes a very good point about patents. You know, I invent the bicycle, and Justin invents the bicycle also, only I beat him to the patent office by 5 minutes. And I get 100% of the patent of a bicycle, and he gets zip. And yet he homesteaded the idea of the bicycle, so he should get it too if he's an independent inventor, and we stipulate that he is. Another problem with patents is that they're a time dimension. Namely, a patent goes for 30 years or 50 years or 50 years after the guy dies or something like that. But that's nonsense. If it was really a property right, look, James owns that tie. He can give it to his children, and the children can give it to their children. 500 years from now, that tie, let's say, will still be around, and his family will have that yellow tie. So what is this nonsense about only a certain number of years? I mean, I own this pen forever, and I give it to my grandchildren, etc. too. Whereas the patent says only after 50 years. Well, what kind of property right is that? Another very powerful argument is, here I get this from Hans Hoppe on performative contradiction. What's a performative contradiction? A performative contradiction is, I yell at you. I'm not angry, and yet what I say is undermined by my action. Or I'm dead. Not that I'm dead tired, but that I'm dead. Well, dead people can't speak, so therefore my saying of I'm dead is falsified by the fact that I'm alive. Okay, so let's suppose we agree with intellectual property. Notice I just said, let's suppose we agree with intellectual property. That's seven words. Let's was invented by Mr. Let's. Agree was invented by Mr. Agree. Intellectual property was invented by Mr. Mr. Intellectual, and Mr. Property. How dare I use those words? These words are owned by somebody else. So if I really believe in intellectual property, I can't speak, can't write, because I'm stealing property, I'm trespassing. So a philosophy where you can't even articulate it is sort of a performative contradiction. It's a problem. Now, the other question is, well, suppose we don't have intellectual property, will we ever have any new inventions? Will we ever have any new computer code, any new, what do you call it, medicines, any new songs, any new anything? And here I think it's an empirical issue. I do believe that in the initial outset, when you inculcate intellectual property, probably it will give an impetus to invention, but I think too much of an impetus, because there's an optimal amount of innovation, and we'll have too much. But after a while, like nowadays, when we have a patent and a copyright system, a lot of people, very intelligent lawyers and chemists and engineers, are fighting over, you know, did you infringe my patent or not? So if I want to invent something, instead of just going directly and inventing it, I have to go circuitously around, and I have to watch out for your patent, James. I have to watch out for Mac's patent. I have to watch out for Justin's patent. And I just can't invent something. I got to worry about you guys. You have to worry about me, and then we'll see each other in court, and we spend a lot of time in court over this. So I can't help but believe that as an empirical issue, patents and copyrights are now slowing us down in terms of innovation, although maybe at the beginning they promoted it. But this guy Boldrin and somebody else have all sorts of examples of, you know, Mozart created all sorts of stuff and there was no copyright, and Handel and Haydn created all sorts of great stuff and there was no patents and copyrights in those days. So I don't really think that they're necessary. Everyone's bashing China now for violating intellectual property. For the libertarian, there shouldn't be any intellectual property. But I think you're right. You know, I said that the only two contentious issues were abortion and immigration, but this really deserves to be a third contentious issue. But in all three cases, you know, sort of my mind is made up. I don't see it as any of these as contentious issues. I think that the libertarians or the Austrians who disagree on this are just plain wrong. But that's the way I look at things.
Okay. Now, before we wrap up here, we want to know one last thing about you, Walter. If you could debate any one person in the world, who would it be and why?
Wow, that's a vicious, nasty question. I don't know. Einstein on economics. Did it have to be alive? Or
okay, let's do two people. We'll do the living and the dead. Okay,
well, I guess on the dead, Einstein. I mean, he was a bright guy, they tell me, in physics, but on economics, he was horrible. I guess Murray Rothbard, too, because that would mean I can enliven him. I miss I mean, he was my friend, my mentor, my guru, and if I could get to debate him by making him alive again, I would do that. I think about him every day. He is the most wonderful person on God's earth, so to speak. I'm an atheist, so I'm just using the vernacular there. But of living people, I don't know, maybe Bernie Sanders or, you know, what's his name? My friend Bob Murphy was trying to get a debate with, what's his name, Krugman?
Yeah, Paul Krugman.
You hear about this? And what he did is he got $100,000 worth of pledges, and he said, "Look, Krugman, debate me, and this $100,000 will go to your favorite charity." And Krugman was obviously too busy to debate the likes of an entity such as Bob Murphy, who was one of the most magnificent Austrian libertarian theorists. Well, look, you guys get up $100,000 for me, and tell Bernie that we'll give the $100,000 to his favorite charity and see if he'll debate me.
His favorite charity is the government.
Okay. Well, we'll give that's true. We'll give that $100,000 to the government if Bernie will debate me. I think it's safe. I don't think Bernie is any more likely to debate me than Krugman is going to debate Bob Murphy.
Yeah.
Anything else to chime in from our co-host here?
No, I think we covered it all. I just want to thank Walter for joining us. It was such an honor to talk with you.
Yeah, thank you, Walter.
Thank you so much, Walter. Where can our followers find you on the web to read more of your materials and find out about your current projects?
Oh, walterblock.com, or my email address, wblock@loyno, L-O-Y-N-O, Louis Oliver Yellow, New Orleans.edu. Guys, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having me on your show, and I look forward to the next time I'm invited.
Thank you so much. Be sure, guys, to check out Mises.org to read more of Walter's materials. Obviously, LouRockwell.com as well. And thank you to all the listeners that tuned into the Liberty Hangout podcast tonight. Make sure you like us on Facebook, follow on Twitter @Liberty Hangout, and subscribe to our YouTube channel here at Liberty Hangout. Make sure to check out libertyhangout.org to read some awesome liberty-minded material from a great lineup of writers. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time.
Take care, guys.